4 years ago, a little over 4 years ago, these working class Latinos picked Eric Adams for mayor, who was an African-American centrist Democrat, former law enforcement official. Then they moved 3 years later to Donald Trump, a white populist nationalist, and then 6 months later, they moved towards a Muslim Democratic Socialist Zohran Mamdani. Like there's nothing ideological about this. They're being forced to make a choice, and ultimately the choice is against the powers that is in place. They're voting against incumbents.
All right, welcome back, everybody. The Independent Voter Podcast. I'm joined today, as usual, with Kara. We got Ethan on the mic today.
Here I am.
And we got a special guest today. Somebody that knows a little bit about the Latino vote, which I think is completely misunderstood across the from the partisan perspective, right? They've been a critical vote, swinging back and forth, and I'm proud to have Mike on here to tell us what's really going on. We've had some discussions before the show about just how misunderstood the Latino vote is across the country, and we're seeing the effects of that. Really, you can look at New York, you can look at California, and they're not talking about really just how impactful the Latino vote is, and it's not because they're switching from one side to the other, right? You've done a lot of work on this, Mike. So what frustrates you about the national conversation?
Well, it's always nice to be a celebrity guest, I guess. I appreciate that.
I never said anything about celebrity status.
I'll say something about celebrity status. Mike, it is great to have you on our show. This is Mike Madrid, everybody, and he's very, very great friend of the Independent Voter Project, and it's lovely to have you. Thank you for joining us, Mike.
Thank you, Kara, for making me feel better after being brought down a notch there. Look, most of my work has been focused on Latino voters for the past 3.5 decades. And Chad, I think you did set that up exactly right. But what we're witnessing really is what I characterize as a de-alignment, not a realignment. And they're very, very rare. Realignments are what we commonly look at when we say, oh, these voters, Southern Democrats are becoming Republicans in the 1990s, or African Americans moved from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party in the civil rights movement in the 60s. A de-alignment is a movement away from both parties. And what you're seeing is the dramatic growth of Latino voters, not just on the voter rolls, but in exploding numbers amongst non-affiliated or independent voters. It's the largest ethnic group in America that's growing the fastest politically, and it is the fastest growing group of independent voters. And they've shown the weakest partisan alliances, which is why you're seeing these rightward shifts, then the historic leftward shift, and then back again. And what they're really telling us is this is really not ideological at all. It's really a reflection of a collapsing system that they're pushing back on and saying, look, this just isn't working, and we're not tied to either of you. That's increasingly the case. And until some of the basics, I think, are addressed, we're going to continue to see this characterize our politics.
I have this.
Mike,
Go ahead, Kara.
Mike, is it in every state, or is it just a California, New York thing, or is this across the board that you're seeing this?
That's a great question, and let me explain why, and then I'll answer the question directly. You'll hear very often people will say kind of that old sleepy line, Latinos are not a monolith. That's true, but no voter group is a monolith, right? Now,
right.
But when people are looking for Latino voters, what they mean by that is they're saying, well, Cubans are different than Mexicans, or different than Venezuelans and Dominicans. Sure, there is truth to that, but they're not. That's never been the biggest differential with the way Latinos make voting decisions. The biggest differential actually has always been generational, meaning how far removed you are from the immigrant experience. And so your question is a very apt one, which is, yes, we have seen more conservative or more Republicans like the Cubans in South Florida and Miami, and then, in Los Angeles, much more Democrat, left-leaning. But we're entering a phase of Latino politics where they're all starting to sort of meld together. And curiously, the commonality is not racial or ethnic. It's actually economic. It's a class. It's a blue-collar voting constituency.
Got it.
And that's really what the commonality is with Latinos, is it's not racial or ethnic at all. It's a class vote. And that's why I think the middle class, you guys know this a lot better than I do, and working folks who don't have the access or privilege or opportunities to get what they need from governments are increasingly disaffected by a party system that is shrinking, and the elites are getting more, they're consolidating power and limiting voter choices. And Latinos are responding to that more as class voters than race or ethnic voters, although both are true.
And one of the things that just surprised me, like, no, I don't know if anybody's reported on this, right? And well, in California, we were the first poll that said, hey, Becerra is going to win this thing. Everybody's like, oh, there might be 2 Republicans, this, that. We did a poll, and it's like, no, Becerra is going to win this thing.
It's
right?
true. It's true.
But beyond that, as it relates to Latino, nobody's talking about the fact, if you look at turnout, the biggest increase, the biggest delta in turnout by far is Latino voters. The California, they increased by almost 10% over the expected turnout of Latino voters. Nobody is talking about what the effect is that on the outcome.
And let me explain why that is so prescient and so insightful. And I'm so glad you guys documented this with research, because, Chad, you also saw exploding numbers of independent voters.
Exactly.
So that's the same, the concentric circles could overlap there, which is the whole point. It's why your work is really, I think, hitting a point where it's going to start seeing exponential returns in a state like California.
Yeah, well, I mean, people are going, oh, the independents don't turn out. They don't do this. And the nonpartisan primary is not working. What are you talking? Look at New York. They had 9% turnout. 9. Just independents alone they haven't finished doing all the complete data, but even with what we know, it's going to be 27, 28%, 4 times New York. That's for independents, right?
Yeah.
And one other quick point, sorry about Ethan, let me interrupt there, but real quickly, what you also have to look at, those 2 points are really insightful. There's one other, which is that spike in independent Latino vote clearly, and I'm sure you're going to do some of the regression analysis and look at this, but clearly went to Becerra. Not all of it, but a lot of it, most of it. And the reason why that's important is this. Becerra is probably not going to get half of the Latino vote when this is all done. For all the hoopla about 150 years, we haven't had a Latino governor. This will be the first, and I think that's fantastic. I've been waiting a big part of my career for the moment. He wasn't getting 60% of the Latino vote. Without that independent Latino vote, you would have seen Becerra in a much tighter frame as everybody else. It's those independent voters that were coming in, Latino voters, who were saying, hey, we want to do something different. We want to see something different. We want a choice here. And unlike New York, where there was no choice, people just sit on their hands and don't engage at all civically. They just don't show up. If you're not giving them a choice, why show up? And that's, I think, the difference between California and New York. And I think that the results show that.
I couldn't agree with that analysis. I mean, we've looked a lot at the numbers. In fact, with Open Primaries, we partnered with an organization called Open Primaries. And in New York, nobody's talking about, the socialists took over. Forget the ideology. Let's talk about the fact that there's only 9% turnout and you have closed primaries. So what, to Mike's point, what happened in California, it can't happen by law because the state of New York has said you're not allowed to vote at this stage unless you join our party. Right? And talk about the results.
Yeah, I mean, we asked, specifically, this poll was only sent to Democrats, and we asked them essentially, why are you a member of the Democratic Party? Why are you registered with them? And what we saw was that a very large percentage, I think 30 to 40%, were told us that they were only a member of the Democratic Party so that they could vote in the primary. And with Latino voters specifically, that number was equivalent to the amount that were proud to be a member of the Democratic Party. So you'll see with these Latinos, they want to participate, and it's the only way to get
we're talking like 60, 70% of them. Those are the ones that did register as a Democratic Party. Basically, we're like, I don't really want to be a Democrat.
Exactly.
I kind of have to be, right?
Which is, I mean, it just shows, like you're saying, in California, they actually have an opportunity to participate because of that open primary system.
Well, and Mike, you brought together like a bunch of the voices and the movers and shakers in this space that have kind of been beating their head against a wall, saying, "Look, this is not a partisan issue. This is a group of independent-minded voters and stuff." And you brought them together in D.C., where you're facing people who may be in Texas or Florida, they're facing different realities, like just because of the way the systems run, right? Like what is that conversation at the higher level that you're having with those with the people who really drive a lot of, the next stage in political outreach?
Yeah, that's a great question. So last week we had a National Latino Summit, first time ever, where in Washington, D.C. at the National Press Club, we convened about 200 or so, quote unquote leaders from both parties, incidentally. We had Republicans, Democrats, and independents, and we had members of labor, we had members of chambers of commerce, we had activists on the right and the left. It was curated somewhat insofar as we wanted to bring people from all over the country, Californians, Texans, people from Washington State, Florida, DC, all over the country, to have a conversation about what an agenda beyond the party labels looks like. Because everybody at every level of both parties what is keenly aware. These are Latinos who are keenly aware that their parties are not meeting the needs of the communities for very different reasons, but clear as day. And so what we were trying to do is have
So it's not as simple as changing from one to another.
Correct.
Right? It's not as simple for these people to be like, okay, the Republicans are doing X, so I'm going to be a Democrat. Or
Kara, that's
the Democrats
exactly
are
right.
doing X, so I'm going to be a Republican. So they're sort of homeless almost. Or they're a little bit of both, like a lot of us.
That's what's so beautiful about the moment. And if you look at all of the polling, Carrie, you nailed it. And if you look at the polling data, it shows that Latinos are the least partisan, the most likely to be independent voters. And another important point, they're also the least racially polarized voter, which is important when you're talking about the Calais decision and communities of interest in redistricting. Latinos are the least racially polarized. So they're emerging as this group that I believe, and this is, I wrote a book called The Latino Century, talking about this phenomenon, talking about how it has the potential to transform our politics and possibly fix it. Because what the group is demanding is everything is a rejection of everything that is broken. What you will see very often is white or black voters say, I really don't like my party, but I hate the other party so much that I'm going to stay here and keep doing the same thing that I've been doing. The actual number of people who are leaving is growing, but it's that stasis, that hyperpolarization that keeps this broken, dysfunctional system clunking along. Every year, there are more Latinos saying, I'm not supporting this. And it's manifesting right now primarily in rejecting candidates who are in office, but it's definitely not ideological. That's I think, the kicker here.
Well, but Mike, I really want to can we just keep talking about basically they're refusing at this point to affiliate, or they're unaffiliating themselves. They're sort of freeing themselves from the bonds of either side and allowing themselves to be sort of free and unaffiliated and more of open agents available for whichever party. Is it they're available for whichever party is going to put their issues on the agenda or pander to them, or is it something even cooler or different than that?
I like to say cooler. Let's use that. Let's say it's cooler. There's a couple things to, again, what I'm characterizing is everything that you just said as a dealignment, which is it's a conscious disaffiliation. There's no desire. They're not looking for a home. They're just not buying into it. They're just we're not buying into this system. And the reason why that's important is because 35% of these voters are under the age of 30. It's an incredibly young vote. So it's not like they're changing their mind and leaving the party, although that is also happening. They never bought in the first place.
That's right.
They've never been a part of the system. They've never believed in the two-party system because they've never seen themselves fully in either one. And what they're looking for is an agenda that addresses their lives. And I think what's happening is very clear. They're recognizing that neither party is capable and also willing to do that. So, for example, you'll see on the Republican side this dramatic overreach of government intrusion with the ICE raids and the crackdowns and the anti-immigrant sentiment.
Right.
And on the left, you'll see the lack of the formation of a working class and lack of economic mobility and economic opportunity. And I think there's this just awareness neither party is going to change. This is who they are. All they do is get louder. They're not making adjustments. They just get more intense, more extreme, more angry, more loud, and they don't want anything to do with either of that. And the opportunity there, and why we had this summit, was to start defining what that is. What is that agenda? It is an agenda that is more pro-growth, pro-building. That's how working class people make their living. It's also more amenable to immigrants and immigration through a legal process. Nobody wants open borders, but nobody wants to, no one's a hater out there either, at least, in the community. And so if you're able to do that, and I believe coupled with reforms to restructure our system, I think you're cooking with gas with a very large, and I hate the term middle because I don't think that's what it is at all. I think it forces the parties away from their extremist elements to start talking about issues that matter again and start acknowledging their own failures in the system if they want to be relevant and viable, or they keep just getting smaller and smaller and more intense until they explode on either side.
I mean,
maybe
you touched
a
on
lot of
something.
people think that's already happened, right?
Yeah.
Well, you touched on something that always drives me up a wall. This is about moderation and these moderate voters, and they use it interchangeably. Yeah, some independents are moderate. There's some that are like left of the Democrats, right of the Republicans. Some that are in between, and like that is kind of, at the end of the day, I think like that's humanity, right? Like they're humans, right? And They go and they'll do these studies and they'll say, okay, well, these are just left leaners or right leaners. And I use an analogy like this. It's like, okay, think if a vegetarian needs to eat dinner and you say, well, the only two things you can have are a hamburger and hot dog, right? At the end of the day, they're going to get really hungry and they're going to eat a hamburger or a hot dog, right? You don't call them a hamburger or hot dog leaner. They're not in between a hamburger and hot dog. They're just starving. And really, that's what we're seeing in the election process. Like, there's people starving for something they actually care about. And the reason you end up with 9% turnout in places like New York, for some reason they don't talk about that ever, is because people are like, I'd rather starve. I'd rather starve than give my vote to any of these, for lack of better terms.
Or that I have to affiliate in order to participate in New York, right? In California, I do not have to affiliate in order to be, have my vote matter and count. And that's what happened. That's the story of California, is you have a bunch of people who have refused to affiliate with either the Democrats or the Republicans, who were the deciding factor in who wound up in the top two in probably, I'm going to say 9 out of 10 races across the state of California on June 2nd. It was profound what happened, right? It was a real thing that happened. It was a huge amount of participation, right? And a huge amount of influence without having to affiliate, which is why this whole thing about getting rid of the top two in California is so misguided. You're talking about these people want to disenfranchise 6.9 million Californians who have chosen not to affiliate with the Democrats or the Republicans. A huge percentage of those are Latinos. And what are you trying to do here? You're trying to shut those people down. You're trying to silence their voices, and you're trying to take away the impact that they have so that you can keep your little closed system, which doesn't work. And go back to New York, which is where 9% turned out. Like, thank you very much. So can we talk just a little bit, Mike? I'm super curious about what you know about the Latino vote and this sort of drift towards, or maybe it's not a drift, towards this socialism and the DSA and the Working Families Party within the Democratic Party. Can you just tell us, like, what I think I know is that Latinos are really, like, they're not into socialism. But tell me if I'm wrong.
Well, I mean, look, it's kind of like what Chad said. Are there elements of that? Sure. But there are some that are really into it. It's just kind of a broad reflection of humanity. But let me explain what's happening here, because a year ago on podcasts, I would get asked the question, can you explain this movement towards right-wing, authoritarianism with Donald Trump, right? It's the same voter groups. It's happening in the same precincts. And that's why when I look at a young male, Latino, 30-year-olds or younger in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, they're moving towards MAGA. When I look at a young male Latino under 30 in New York City, they're moving towards democratic socialism. To me, there's nothing ideological about what's happening. It's very simply explained, which is it's a rejection of the incumbency and the power systems that exist.
Mm-hmm.
They're
the
entire
they're
system.
simply
They're
just
picking
saying,
the
I want
hamburger or
change.
hot dog. They're
They're
picking the hamburger or
hot dog.
Right?
Yeah. So let me give you another example. In New York City, where this just happened, New York precincts, a little over 4 years ago, these working class Latinos picked Eric Adams for mayor, who was an African-American centrist Democrat, former law enforcement official. They moved decidedly in that direction. Then they moved 3 years later to Donald Trump, a white populist nationalist, and then 6 months later, they moved towards a Muslim Democratic Socialist Zohran Mamdani. Like there's nothing ideological about this. To Chad's explanation, it's hamburgers and hot dogs. They're being forced to make a choice, and ultimately the choice is against the powers that is in place. They're voting against incumbents, but I think it's much deeper and much more sophisticated than like the anti-incumbency that started in 1994, right? With people just throwing the bums out because they're the bums that are there. This is not an anti-partisan. It's not negative partisanship. It's not negative partisanship. And what that means is what happened in the mid-1990s with the rise of independent voters too, when you start to see that this really starts to explode in the 90s, was people were starting to move away from the system, but there were still a lot of demographic markers that would say, well, this is, an older white male guy from a rural community who's independent, who thinks that the Republican Party is too centrist. He's still going to vote for a Republican. That's not true anymore. Like, we're losing a lot of that basic demographic sentiment because so many people are leaving en masse, Latinos specifically. And so what I'm saying is they're not a lot of, if you look at white or black voters, for example, more often than not, they're voting against other parties as opposed to voting for their parties. Latinos aren't even doing that. They're just saying, I don't care who you are. I'm voting against you regardless. I'm not loyal to one tribe, and I'm not voting against a party. I'm not voting for a party. A pox on all your houses, because this system is just, the system is rigged, as one famous socialist would say, or as the right-wing populist nationalist president would say, drain the swamp. They're both using populist language, and this emergent Latino populism is fundamentally independent and rejecting the party systems en masse.
Right. And then we see like the news about, we see the news, or we see the politician that gets elected, and they think like that's a mandate for all the stuff, all the ideology and the policy positions. It's like, no, it's not. It's a rejection of the other one. It doesn't mean we want exactly the opposite. It's like, right. And so that's the dilemma we're in so what's the solution though?
Well, for me, I think the solution is kind of, in many ways, it's sort of self-medicating, I guess might be the right term. But I want to bring this back again. It's really important, Carrie. You did ask the right question. Everyone right now in this moment is asking, are Latinos moving more socialist? A year ago, they were asking, are they moving more authoritarian right wing? It's important to look at that arc, because it's telling us it's neither. Mm-hmm. They're rejecting both power structures. That then gets to Chad's argument. And what I have said is the irony of this whole situation is the whole system was created and predicated on the idea that voters would be rational actors. And if the system wasn't working, you would vote those people out. The only group doing that are Latinos.
Yep.
But it's
interesting.
But it's become so rare that we can't figure it out, because we're such creatures of a hyper-partisan two-party system structure that we're like, well, it's either red or blue. Those are the only choices you have to make. And so what's wrong with Latino voters? And it's like, it's not Latino voters, it's everybody else that's stuck in these silos that we're trying to break down. So to Chad's point, how does it fix itself? I think the beauty of the moment is it is fixing itself as we start talking about and targeting and engaging more independent voters. More people feel the permission structure. There's that term that's maybe overused, to leave and say, I'm out, I'm done. And when I'm doing my show, my podcast, and people say, well, how do we fix the system? One of the first advice I give to people is leave your party. Leave the party, get more engaged civically, but reject the party system as it is, because they're literally incapable of fixing the problem, because that's not the job of a political party, by the way. The job of a political party is to accrue power. That's all it is.
Yes, 100%.
That is why they exist. Like, why do we fool ourselves into thinking they're virtuous? They are vessels to accumulate and accommodate power. That's it.
Yes, 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 yes. It's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Mike, you
What does
brought
the
up-
young guy say? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask, you brought up the word predisposed to kind of, be willing to not vote within that two-party system and kind of like change her. What is it about the Latino community and specifically younger Latinos that kind of allows them to break that mold, that makes them different in terms of their mindset from other communities? Is it kind of like a lack of like social reinforcement? Is it coming from the older generations? What do you think that is that makes them that way?
It's a great question, Ethan. Let me say this. You'll as you hear me talk about this and explain this dynamic, as I mentioned earlier, there's these larger concentric circles that overlap with Latinos in so many other areas. The question that you're asking is really, are they doing this because they're Latinos or are they doing it because they're young?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And my belief is it's more a function of being young
I see.
than it is of being Latino, because what we're seeing is this explosion of young Latinos on the voter rolls. And it's very significant. It's going to start growing at about 1% a year for the next 20 or 30 years, which is massive, massive growth.
Is that what your book's about? That's
yeah.
what your book's about, right? The
Yeah.
Latino Century. Okay.
Thanks. Yeah, that's what it's about. It's all about
Yeah.
how this dynamic is going to change the two-party system, what's wrong with both parties, how it's changing the country's democracy. Sorry, where was I? Young voters.
Yeah, rising 1% a year.
Yeah. So what's happening is if you look at all young voters, not just Latinos, they were showing this rightward shift too. It was called the rightward shift again. I think it was more of a de-alignment, and that's coming to bear now because they're rejecting the Republican Party now in the way they were rejecting the Democratic Party a year ago. And it was for the same reasons, by the way.
Yep.
So as long as we're focused on the fact that both parties aren't addressing real problems, people are rejecting it, and generationally, they're not bought in the way that their parents used to be. And the first time I saw this generational split was the 2016 primary, where Latinos under the age of 30, 35 were overwhelmingly voting for Bernie Sanders, for example, in the Nevada caucuses, like 80%. But if you were over 30, you were voting 80% for Hillary Clinton.
For Hillary.
And so what you had was older Latinos who politicized, where Latino politics was very racial and ethnically oriented. If you were a Latino, you were a Democrat. Young people don't believe that at all anymore. And that doesn't mean that they're more Republican. It means they're less of both.
That's it. What you just said is that's it. It doesn't mean that they're one or the other. It means that they are less of both. And that is what's happening. And so I guess my question is, they're also not necessarily asking to have a new party and to have it be the Young Latino Party. Like, they don't want a new party.
No.
They don't think parties are the answer. They're willing to free themselves. They're willing to be unaffiliated. They're willing to pick a candidate sort of that they like, more than the next candidate. But what the answer probably is something closer to having what California has in other places, right? To open the primary systems up so that anybody can participate, anybody can run. You've got everybody on the deal at that point.
And importantly, to allow the candidates to break the mold and speak to Latinos in the the lanes that they need to be spoken to in. Because there's so many. I mean, I brought this up last week, but I was talking to a young Latino man, and he said, I'm aligned. I like the Second Amendment, but I know the majority of the policies that the Democrats support, I agree with, and I just don't know where to place myself. And I told him, look, you're actually in a good spot here because in California, you can vote for a candidate that speaks to both of those things. You're locked into one or the other. And yeah, like you were saying, that's exactly what we need to change everything.
Right. And this is why.
And then we need to get rid of first past the post, right? Then we need to basically get rid of systems that completely entrench the two parties in their power. Like, we need to, and the way that we can do that is we get rid of this first past the post, winner take all system, and we have systems where people can use instant runoffs, rank their choices in order of preference, and that structural change allows for these people who don't want to affiliate with one side or the other to really have their voices heard and to really make a true impact on who actually ends up getting elected, and then how they actually govern, right? How these people, once they are elected, how they govern.
Well, actually, I think what precedes that is the basis of what IVP's long-term legal strategy. I mean, we filed cases in New Jersey and California. We filed amicus in Florida, is saying we have a process right now that it's not a independent Republican or Democrat issue. It's a fundamental voting rights issue. And right now, we've created a system that you have to forfeit your First Amendment right of non-association in order to participate, right? That's a voting rights issue. If we put that kind of barrier and said, you're Latino, and so therefore, you have to go and register with a party, we'd say that's absurd. If you said, okay, we're going to put this barrier in front of women or in front of black voters, you'd say that's absurd. Yet we've taken the largest block of voters by self-identification and said, you know what, you have to force yourself within a political party, whether or not you agree with it, as a condition of participating in our election process. That's our lawsuit.
So what you're all saying is exactly right. And Kara, just to back up a little bit, and I'll get to Chad and thread this whole thing together. That was the first statement I gave when I kicked off the summit, is we're not here to start a new party at all.
Right.
That's not what this is about.
No.
The goal is to empower voters to make the right choices and develop a culture where that becomes the way we practice politics. Because, guys, that's the way the system was designed.
Yes.
And what Chad's doing with the lawsuits is exactly right, because if you understand political parties, again, their whole job is to accumulate and solidify power. That's what they exist for. You wouldn't need a lot of these reforms if voters were voting more rationally and there was a culture of rejecting these power structures. And what I mean by that is, if you had voters that were rejecting this en masse, the ability for political parties to solidify and cement the power to the extent that they have would not be happening right now. But if you look at the delta, for example, this is one of the most remarkable statistics, the delta, or the change, we say, the shift in voting behavior between both white and black voters of the working class. 60% of America's voters are non-college educated working class voters. The delta of them leaving their party is in the single digits. People don't change their party behavior. They don't. So it doesn't matter whether you're in a pandemic, in the middle of a war nobody wants, the economy crashing. It doesn't matter. Like, white rural voters are not going to leave the Republican Party, and the same is true of black voters in the Democratic Party. It's just not going to happen. And so when that happens, what you do is you literally build the party power into our structure. And so they get away with doing the stuff that Chad says. You have to register in a party to participate. Like, that is so antithetical to what the founders were talking about when they created this system.
Right.
Like, it's literally, you have to play in our game to be involved in your democracy. Well, that's the fruit of the poison tree. Everything that comes from that is going to be screwed up, and it is. It doesn't get better because the parties aren't here to make a better democracy. They're there to advance their own interests.
Right. If we don't make the correlate, like, that is why we have hyper-partisanship. Because,
that's why.
Like, just look at the rules. Look at the rules of the elections.
Yeah, no, it's so true. It's not because of Donald Trump. It's not because of any specific candidate. The conditions that existed before they came along created that.
Correct.
Exactly right. Well, we could probably talk about this for weeks on end, right? But for our listeners, Mike, if they're listening to this, they want to follow your work, they want to find your book, or where they can hear from you regularly. Where do they find you?
Best place to find me is on Substack. I write a newsletter called The Great Transformation. It's about changing institutions and demography and technology and how it all is meeting at this moment to change the way our civic life and politics work. But huge fans, obviously, of the Independent Voter Project work and the reforms you guys are working on all over the country. It's exactly what's needed at this time to begin these discussions to break down this crumbling system. And I say that, guys, because I do believe that. The best reform ultimately is weakening the parties and allowing for more voter choice. I love the experiments that we take and ask and share ideas about what system can replace it to make it better. But fundamentally, I think it comes down to a culture of rejecting these power structures that are trying to limit our choice in our lives and our ability to own our own government. So thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Well, I know you're a busy guy. I appreciate you coming on the show. I know we're going to see a lot more of each other. Our listeners, thank you for joining in again. Kara, Ethan, Got anything to?
Yeah,
any
make
last
sure
words?
you subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and it's been great talking to you guys.
All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.